Rain hammered against the tall glass windows of the Hawthorne Lounge as a shy waitress named Ella balanced a silver tray in trembling hands. A reflection flickered in the mirror wall. A faint ghost among the glittering elites, the scent of roasted truffle and champagne filled the air, yet she could barely breathe. Her heart beat faster. With each step across the marble floor, every click of her shoes echoing louder than it should. At the corner table sat Adrian Hawthorne, the billionaire heir, whose cold eyes could silence a room with one glance. He wore success like armor tailored, and sharp. A man too powerful to be questioned and too proud to care. Beside him sat his mother, Margaret Hawthorne, a woman draped in quiet grace, her eyes distant, her hands folded in silence. She was deaf, and the world around her buzzed with words she could not hear. The servers avoided her, afraid of awkward gestures or the effort it took to understand. Ella approached slowly, her voice barely audible as she whispered to herself in a nervous habit. She could not break the tray, wobbled her grip as she placed crystal glasses before them. Then one slip, a sharp clink aghast. The room froze. Champagne spilled over Adrian's sleeve in a golden arc. His eyes snapped toward her, ice cold. He rose, towering above her like judgment itself. "Do you even know what this costs?" His tone sliced through the air. A few guests chuckled, others whispered, but Ella didn't look at him. Her gaze found Margaret, who was watching not with anger but with concern. Without thinking, Ella raised her hands and began to sign. Her fingers moved swiftly and gracefully. "I'm sorry, it was an accident." The moment still, Margaret's face lit up with surprise, then softened with joy. Her lips curved into the faintest smile. She signed back. "It's all right, dear. Accident happened." Gasps fluttered around the room. Someone whispered, "She knows sign language." Adrian's scowl faltered, confusion breaking through his arrogance. For just a second his mother's hands moved again, alive with expression, laughter, without sound, filling the air for the first time that evening. Ella smiled back, relieved, her hands trembling slightly from the rush. Margaret gestured for her to come closer. She did, and they exchanged a few more signs, simple, polite, but meaningful. Then Margaret took Ella's hand, briefly a silent "thank you." Ella nodded and turned away to finish her shift. But she could still feel the warmth of that touch lingering long after. From that night onward, Margaret returned to the restaurant more often, and every time she came she requested Ella by name. Ella became her bridge to a world that had forgotten to listen. They spoke through their hands over soft meals and warm tea. Margaret shared stories of gardens she once tended, music she used to love. Ella listened with eyes wide and heart open for the first time in her life. She felt seen not as a servant, but as a person. Adrian occasionally joined them, rarely saying much, always checking his watch. He watched Ella, as if trying to decipher a language he refused to learn. He saw how his mother smiled at this waitress, how laughter lit her face in ways he had not seen in years. It unsettled him. He dismissed it as sentiment. But somewhere deep down a question lingered, one he did not want to ask. One afternoon, Margaret gifted Ella a silk scarf, pale blue, embroidered with tiny white lilies. She signed, "You remind me of my daughter before the world hardened her." Ella blinked, taken aback. "Yet a daughter." Margaret only smiled, her eyes wistful. "I still do." But she stopped listening. That night, Ella walked home beneath the city lights, clutching the scarf close to wind, carried the faint smell of rain and car smoke. She wondered why someone so kind could live surrounded by silence and indifference. She didn't know what hurt Margaret more, her deafness or her son's inability to hear what truly mattered. A week later, a new reservation appeared on the schedule of the Hawthorne family again. Private event, strict service protocols. Ella felt her chest tighten as she saw the note. Beside it, Margaret requested her presence. Personally, the staff exchanged looks, some jealous, others curious. The night of the event, the restaurant shimmered with candlelight. Wealthy guests filled every corner, laughter spilling like wine. Ella wore her cleanest uniform, hair neatly tied, hands steady this time. When she approached the table, Margaret greeted her with joy, signing, "You look lovely." Adrian barely glanced up, immersed in conversation with business partners about stock mergers and market expansion. As Ella served the table, she caught fragments of his voice, sharp with authority, dismissive when he spoke of charity as a publicity tool. His words made her stomach twist. She turned to Margaret, who rolled her eyes with silent amusement. Her fingers moved slyly. "He talks too much." Ella stifled a laugh. Adrian noticed the exchange, his brow furrowed. He leaned closer. "What are you two saying?" Margaret signed something quickly. Ella hesitated, then spoke softly. She said, "The food is wonderful." It was a harmless lie, one that earned a brief nod from him and a secret grin from Margaret. Hours passed until only a few guests remained. The city lights shimmered outside the window like scattered diamonds. Adrian excused himself for a call, leaving his mother and Ella alone. Margaret leaned in her, sign slower, now thoughtful. "You have a kind soul. Ella, would you come to our home next week? I want you to interpret for me at a small gathering." Ella froze. "Your home?" She glanced around, unsure. I'm just a waitress, ma'am, I'm not. Margaret interrupted her, signing firmly. You listen better than most people. I know I trust you. The weight of those words settled deep in Ella's chest. She nodded slowly. I'd be honored. Just then Adrian returned, his tone cutting. Mother, what is this about bringing staff to the house now? Margaret replied through signs, her expression stern. My decision. Adrian's jaw tightened. She doesn't belong there. Margaret ignored him, completely turned back to Ella with a smile. The air between them felt heavy, thick, with unspoken tension. Adrian's glare burned through Ella, but she stood her ground. Margaret's fingers brushed Ella's one last time. Next Saturday, she signed softly. That night, Ella stared at her reflection in the dark window of her small apartment, clutching the blue scarf. Once more her heart pounded with fear and anticipation. The thought of stepping into the world of billionaires was terrifying, yet something inside her whispered that this was more than an invitation. It was a beginning of something that could change everything. She exhaled slowly, whispering to herself, Don't mess this up, Ella. The Hawthorne mansion glittered like a kingdom of glass and gold as Ella stood at the gate, her heart racing beneath a borrowed coat. The night air smelled of jasmine and rain, her reflection trembling on the polished marble. When the doors opened inside was a cathedral of wealth, crystal chandeliers gleaming over a sea of people dressed in silk and arrogance. Every sound seemed amplified, every gaze sharp and curious. A security guard guided her toward the grand hall where laughter and champagne floated together like perfume. Margaret sat near the front, radiant in silver, her hands moving as soon as she saw Ella. The warmth in her expression steadied Ella's trembling nerves. You came. Margaret signed, joy flickering in her eyes. Ella smiled, signing back. I couldn't say no to you. Then she noticed Adrian standing nearby, surrounded by investors, his face carved with irritation. When their eyes met, his look carried warning, not welcome. As the event began, Ella stayed close by Margaret, interpreting softly, her hands flowing with precision. The speeches echoed with vanity, words about wealth, charity, and legacy. None of them reached Margaret, but through Ella's signing, she finally understood them. Her eyes sparkled with gratitude as she signed small comments, and laughter. Adrian watched from across the room, his expression unreadable. When the auction started, Margaret signed something to Ella, long sentences layered with emotion. Ella translated aloud, her voice gentle and sincere. My late husband built this empire with hard work, not greed. I wish he could see how it helps others now. The audience smiled, touched by her sincerity, but Adrian shifted uncomfortably as if her words exposed something raw beneath his polished facade. Margaret continued signing slower, now her eyes soft as she looked at her son. Ella spoke her words. And to my son, I want to say thank you for keeping the dream alive. I am proud of you, Adrian. The room fell quiet for a moment, a rare silence of truth and tenderness. But then Adrian stepped forward, forcing a laugh that didn't reach his eyes. Ladies and gentlemen, forgive my mother. She sometimes misunderstands her own message. He turned toward Ella, his voice sharper now. You're doing your best, but your translation seems a little too poetic, don't you think? A few guests chuckled nervously. Ella froze her hands, still mid-motion. Margaret's eyes widened with confusion as her son's tone sliced through the air. Adrian smiled, for crowd polished and cruel. She tends to exaggerate my virtues, don't take it too seriously. The audience laughed this time for real, and the sound hit Ella like thunder. Margaret's face turned pale, her hands trembling as she signed, desperately asking what was being said. Ella's throat tightened. She couldn't bring herself to translate those words. Not this humiliation, not for her. Margaret rose abruptly, knocking her chair back, and signed furiously. Enough. But the room didn't understand. They only saw a frail woman flailing her arms. Adrian gestured for security, pretending to calm her. It's fine, everyone should just get emotional. The laughter returned, softer but deadly. Margaret turned and walked away, her expression broken. Ella followed her out through the whispering crowd. In the quiet hallway, Margaret's hands shook as she signed. He used to listen, he used to care. Ella wanted to speak, but her voice broke. I'm so sorry. Margaret reached for her hand. You did nothing wrong, my dear. The wrong one is him. Days passed, and the gossip spread like wildfire across the city. The deaf woman's meltdown, they called the billionaire's mother embarrassed at her own event. Adrian's PR team controlled the story, shaping it to his image. Margaret stayed silent behind closed doors, and Ella was told by the restaurant manager that her services were no longer required. Orders from above, he said, avoiding her eyes. She walked out that night into the cold rain. Her uniform soaked her heart hollow. When she returned home, her small apartment felt emptier than ever. She stared at the silk scarf draped over a chair, the gift that once meant kindness, now a reminder of everything she lost. She applied for other jobs, but each call ended the same polite rejections, followed by silence. Adrian's influence reached further than she imagined. One evening, she visited a hospital after hearing from another waitress that Margaret had fallen in the corridor, smelled of antiseptic. In despair, nurses whispered as she slipped through a back entrance unseen. She found Margaret in a quiet room, pale, but still beautiful, her eyes lighting up. When she saw Ella, she signed weakly. "You shouldn't be here. He doesn't want visitors." Ella sat beside her, taking her hand. "I don't care what he wants. I needed to see you." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes as she signed. "He thinks he protects me, but he only isolates me. He's lost himself in noise and pride." Ella nodded, understanding deeper than words could express. "He doesn't deserve your pain." Margaret shook her head. "He doesn't deserve your silence. Either show him what he's done, let him see." A nurse entered, urging Ella to leave, but Margaret squeezed her hand before she stood. "Promise me you'll make him listen," Ella whispered. "I promise." Outside the hospital, the city lights, blurred through her tears. The rain had returned, gentle now, like whispers against the pavement. She tilted her head to the sky, letting it wash away the fear. She remembered Margaret's trembling, signs of sadness, in her eyes the truth no one else could see. In that moment, something inside her shifted. The quiet girl who once hid behind trays and polite smiles began to disappear, replaced by someone who had nothing left to lose and everything left to prove. She walked home with a new resolve, a reflection in every dark window, no longer timid. But fierce. Her voice might be small, but her hands, her truth, her heart, could speak louder than any billionaire could silence. By the time she reached her door, the storm had ended. The night was still. The world felt like it was holding its breath, and Ella whispered to herself, "He will listen." Weeks passed, and the city hummed with stories of scandal, wealth, and hypocrisy, while Ella sat alone in her small apartment, replaying every word Margaret had signed in that hospital room. Her promise echoed inside her chest, a vow that would not let her sleep. The world had taken her job, her dignity, her peace, but it had not taken her voice, even if it came through her hands. She began late one night, sitting before the glow of her old laptop, fingers trembling over the keyboard. She created a page under the name The Silent Listener and began recording videos, simple, short, raw. She would sign stories of love, betrayal, greed, and silence. Her words appeared in subtitles for the world to read, and her face, though never named, carried the truth in every movement. One video turned into 5, then 10. The world listened to views. Rose from hundreds to millions. People shared her. Clips with captions like, "She speaks louder than sound," and "The truth you can feel without hearing." In one video, she signed a story about a mother whose son had everything but compassion. Her eyes burned with emotion as she moved her hands in fluid rage. He built walls of money so high, he forgot to sound her laughter. The clip spread across platforms faster than gossip in a storm, until journalists began asking who was the silent listener. Some recognized the gestures, the details. The setting, the name Hawthorne started to appear in the comments, and then it exploded. Adrian woke to his phone buzzing with messages, his name trending for all the wrong reasons. Billionaire neglects deaf mother videos. Exposed truth. His empire trembled under the weight of public outrage. Investors panicked. Headlines screamed hypocrisy and silence. He slammed the phone down, rage flashing in his eyes. His own mother had refused his calls. His office was flooded with reporters. His assistant whispered that Ella, the waitress, had done this. He couldn't believe it. He refused to. He drove to the hospital that same day, determined to end it, furious at the woman who had dared challenge him. The hallways seemed longer this time. Colder nurses looked away as he passed. He found her outside under a tree, surrounded by children from the deaf wing. She was teaching them to sign, laughter rippling through their small, silent world. He froze, watching her for a moment, because she looked different, stronger, radiant, even without sound. When she noticed him, her smile vanished. The children stepped back uncertain. He took a step closer, his voice sharp. "You destroyed my name. You ruined everything I built." She looked up, calm, her eyes unflinching, and signed slowly. "I showed them what you built." He clenched his fist. "You had no right." Her response came gentle but cutting. "Your mother asked me to make you listen. I kept my promise." He wanted to argue, to shout, but then Margaret appeared from the doorway, pale but upright, her eyes locked on her son. And for the first time in years, she looked at him not with disappointment, but with quiet strength. She signed firmly, her movement steady as Ella translated. "You've built a fortune on silence, not strength. You silence others to feel powerful, but power means nothing if it deafens you to love." A crowd had gathered, patients, nurses, journalists, drawn by the spectacle of the billionaire and the waitress and the mother, who had been ignored for too long. Cameras flashed. But the only language that mattered was the one spoken without sound. Adrian stood frozen, each sign a blow to his pride, each word translated a mirror to his heart. His lips trembled, his voice breaking. "Mother, please, I didn't mean to hurt you." Margaret stepped forward, laying a hand on his cheek. Her eyes shimmered as she signed. "Then start listening." He fell to his knees there in front of everyone, tears carving lines through his composure. Ella watched silently, her chest tight. The crowd stood still. Even the air seemed to pause. Adrian's hands moved clumsy, uncertain, as he tried to sign back. "I'm sorry." The word imperfect, but pure. Margaret smiled through tears, pulling him closer, embrace quiet, but full of forgiveness. Reporters captured the moment, calling it the scene that silenced the city. Adrian spoke later through a public statement, admitting his arrogance and pledging to do better. But words could not repair what deeds had broken, so he began with action. Within weeks, he launched a foundation dedicated to deaf education and accessibility, naming it the Margaret Foundation for Silent Voices. At its core was Ella, who he asked to direct the outreach program. She hesitated, but Margaret insisted, signing, "He needs your strength, not your silence." Ella accepted, though not for fame or reward, but because she believed in Margaret's dream. They worked side by side, transforming empathy into change. Adrian visited, often humbled, quieter, different each visit. He practiced, signing with his mother's fingers, awkward but eager, and every time she laughed softly, the soundless music of forgiveness filling the room. Months later, at the foundation's opening ceremony, cameras rolled as Adrian stood beside his mother and Ella addressing the crowd. He spoke carefully, slowly. "I used to think success was measured by what people said about me. Now I know it's measured by what I hear when the world is silent." He turned to his mother, who signed proudly. "And what do you hear now?" He smiled, tears in his eyes. "I hear you." After the applause, after the speeches, after the crowd dispersed, Ella walked the garden where it had all begun, under the same sky that once poured rain. The night was calm, the city lights distant. She could hear laughter from inside the hall, Margaret's laughter bright and full. Ella closed her eyes, breathing deeply the scent of roses and new beginnings. She whispered softly, "Some people shout to be heard, others whisper and change everything." Behind her, Adrian stood quietly, hands in his pockets, his voice gentle for once. "Thank you, Ella." She turned, meeting his gaze, and simply signed, "Listen." He nodded, understanding more than words could express. The story that had begun with spilled champagne and silence ended not with revenge, but with redemption. The shy waitress, the arrogant heir, and forgotten mother, now bound by something greater than wealth or pride. In the stillness of that moment, the world seemed to pause, as if finally learning how to hear.